Hey everyone, welcome back to Hudson Appliance for another episode of Wicked Good Food. I'm your host, Matt Williams, and today's theme for this show was born out of frustration. I recently had a birthday, and my wife asked me what I wanted for dinner, and I said I wanted chicken croquettes. So chicken croquettes was something I grew up having every once in a while. My mom would buy them. They were prepackaged, frozen. They came with this little sauce, and for whatever reason, I had a craving for it. So she went and searched 3 supermarkets. She talked to my mom. She talked to my sister-in-law. Nobody makes them anymore. It's a shame. So we're going to make them tonight. And then if you need, you can probably mail order them from me. I can make them ahead and send them to you. But we're also going to make, to go with it, we're going to make some of this spaghetti squash. We're going to make some mashed potatoes. I know we just did mashed potatoes a couple weeks ago, but these are going to be a little bit different with not quite so much butter. And we're also going to make my great-grandmother's applesauce squares. So the first thing we're going to do to get going is to cut this squash in half. So you want to make sure you have a nice sharp knife, because this is a winter squash, so it's pretty hard. Just keep working until you get through it. It doesn't have to be perfectly in half. And the reason we're going to cut it in half is so that we can remove our seeds. All right, there we go. So we've got it in half. I'm just going to use a spoon and scoop out the seeds. I find a spoon's the best way to go, because after you get the bulk of them out, you can kind of take and just scrape. Same thing as a pumpkin. It smells very similar to a pumpkin, actually. So this is actually a really, really simple dish that looks pretty cool. I don't know if, I'm sure some of you out there have never worked with spaghetti squash before, but it's a really cool ingredient, and you'll see why. So real simply, I'm going to take these, I'm going to put them on this baking dish, drizzle a little bit of olive oil over them, and I'm going to sprinkle them with some salt. You can be kind of generous with the salt. If you want, you can use your fingers and kind of push it around a little bit. I'm going to flip these over so the skin side is up, the cut side's down. They're going to go right into a 350-degree oven. Depending on the size of your squash, it's going to take about 45 minutes or so for it to cook. All right, I'm just going to move these scraps off to the side. The next thing we need to do is to get our applesauce squares into the oven. So this recipe was handed down to me from my mother, which she got from her mother, which she got from her mother. And they were originally called spice squares. And so there's a lot of spice in these, but I'll show you how we make them. First thing I'm going to do is stick some applesauce. There's about 1.5 cups of applesauce into our pan. And this is actually fresh made applesauce. I made it earlier today. Beautiful. Baking soda, sprinkle it right in with my applesauce. This is what the recipe says to do, and who am I to mess with 4 generations? So let's mix this around. Then we're going to add our other dry ingredients. So I have a little bit of salt. I have cloves and cinnamon. And I'm also going to add some vegetable oil, a cup of sugar, and mix this all together. So these have a real nice brown color that comes from all the cinnamon and all the clove. It's quite a lot of cinnamon and clove. All right, so that's pretty well mixed. Now I'm going to add a cup of raisins and 2 cups of flour. Now, like I said, this recipe's, I don't know how many years old it is. It's got to be 75 years old. So I don't know why they say to put the flour last, but my guess would be they're very smart and they want these to be nice and tender. Remember, the more you mix flour with liquid, the more you're going to develop that gluten. That gluten is going to make things not tender. So I'm going to stir this only enough to incorporate all my ingredients. Beautiful. All right, so that's what we're looking for. It's all right if you still see a little bit of flour on there. Now we need to take a little butter. I'm just going to take a little butter, put it in my fingers, and just grease this pan. This is just going to make your life easier when it comes time to get these out. You don't have to grease it super heavy. We want to do a decent layer on there. Make sure you get about 1 inch or so up the sides. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and take my batter and put it right in. You can see how thick it is. It's a bit thicker than pancake batter. I'm gonna get every last bit of this goodness in there. Beautiful. And I'm just gonna spread it around the pan a bit. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pop this right in the same oven. Now the next thing we need to do is to get our mashed potatoes going. We're gonna take a break for a couple minutes. I'm gonna clean up a bit. I'm gonna go ahead and cut up our red potatoes and we'll go on from there. All right, so I've cleaned up a little bit. I've cut a bunch of potatoes and you can see I'm just giving them kind of a rough chop. What I'm looking for here is to have them all be the same size. So like last time, if you remember last time I made potatoes, I took great care to keep our potatoes nice and dry. I really wanted to keep them super dry, super fluffy, so when I added our butter, if you remember that we did about 4.5 pounds of potato and about 3 pounds of butter. So we actually created an emulsion between our potatoes and butter, which is always fun. But I didn't want too much water, or that would have made it more difficult. Here, I don't want a ton of water in my mashed potatoes, but I'm not super concerned about it. So they'll cook nicely. In this pot here, I have a little bit of butter. I'm gonna warm it up a little bit more. And this is gonna be the beginning of our croquettes. What a croquette is essentially, it's some sort of ground or mashed up food product that's breaded and fried, more or less. So we're gonna make chicken croquettes. Our chicken croquettes are gonna have chicken. This is one of those roasted chickens you can get at the supermarket. I bought it this morning. It was cold, so that's one of the ones that they had from last night. So what we're gonna do is just tear that up. We're gonna add some celery and some onions, and we're gonna bind it all together with a bechamel sauce, which is going to be extremely thick. One of the thickest sauces you've ever seen, I can almost guarantee. We'll start that process by cutting our celery. Now the celery is gonna give some nice flavor and some nice crunch. If you like to bite into a big piece of celery, leave it big. I like it relatively small. I do like the little crunch from it, but I don't like it when I get a huge piece of celery. So our first step is going to be to sweat our vegetables. And you've heard me talk about sweating before, but what we're looking to do is we're not sauteing, so it's not super high heat. We don't want to brown these at all. We just want some of the moisture to come out of them. Some of that celery flavored water, essentially. I'm only going to use about half of this one. All right. And then go ahead and give this a nice dice. So if you don't like celery, you don't have to add the celery. If you don't like onions, don't add the onions. But the onions and the celery, I think, really kind of take this over the top, because essentially it's a milk sauce. So it's thickened milk with a bunch of chicken. All right, so we'll go ahead and throw that in there. I'm going to turn the heat up a bit now that there's a little more in the pan. That's good. I don't think I'm going to use all that. I'll slide that aside. Now my onion I want to do relatively fine. As always, we're going to leave the root end on our onion. Cut off that side. Now it's not going to roll on us. We'll cut this puppy in half. We're only going to use half of it. Now I can hear, that's one of the cool things with these induction stoves. Already this thing's heated, it started bubbling. I don't want it quite that high, so I'm gonna try to find a happy medium. Turn it down to about half power. So when I was a kid and we had these chicken croquettes, they always came with sauce, and we were just talking about it here actually, but the sauce was in like a little plastic pouch that was sealed, and you would just throw that in some boiling water or even just some warm water, heat up the sauce, and pour it over the top of it. I don't actually know exactly what that sauce was, but it seems pretty similar to a supreme sauce. So I'm gonna make a supreme sauce as well tonight that's gonna go on top of these. All right, I'm not gonna use quite all that onion either. Beautiful. I just want to take and make sure everything's coated. This looks good. So now remember, when you're making a roux, you want to use equal parts of your fat and your flour. So in this instance, I'm using butter. This is a little less than 1/4 pound of butter. It's about 3 ounces or so. So I don't let that cook until our onions turn translucent. In the meantime, I'm going to take our chicken. I'm just going to kind of manhandle this thing and break it apart. So I'm going to separate the legs and thighs, and I want to pull the skin off because the skin's not going to be a very good texture, but the skin is good eating. So I won't eat it right now in front of you, though. That would feel bad. Your mouths would be watering at home and everything. All right, so I'm just going to take with my thumb and find the middle of the bone here and just pop off this whole breast in one piece. Same thing with the other side. Now you can be super careful with it if you want and get every last little bit of chicken off it. Or you can leave a little bit on there and use this and throw it in and make some soup. And then after you've simmered it with your other stuff, you can pull off all the little hunks of chicken. Here's your wishbone. We'll leave that there if anyone feels lucky. Then I'm going to take our thigh meat and do the same thing. I'm going to pull the skin off. There's only one bone in the thigh, so I'm just going to remove that one bone. That can go in our pile. And we'll do our other thigh as well. So one of the reasons that these were invented was because people didn't necessarily have a lot of money. And you saw the size of that chicken. We're going to stretch this chicken really far by using really inexpensive ingredients. If you were on the farm, chances are you had milk, or you could barter with one of your neighbors for some milk. And same thing with butter, and we've got some flour. That's about all that goes in this. All right. We'll save these because these are good eating too. We'll eat those later. All right, take a look at this. All right, now if we take a peek here, we can see that our onions are just starting to turn translucent. So now is a really important time in the cooking of our sauce. We need to turn our heat down, and we're going to add our flour. So I'm going to sprinkle in our flour. And what I'm looking for is that the consistency of the fat and the flour together are going to be kind of like wet sand. So I didn't actually take the time to weigh out my flour and weigh out my butter. I'm going to do it by eye. If you feel more comfortable weighing it out, go right ahead. Just remember, you want to literally weigh it out though. You don't want to use half a cup, because a half a cup of flour doesn't necessarily weigh the same amount as half a cup of butter. Think about it. What weighs more, a pound of flour or a pound of lead? They're the same. But think about what has more volume to it. A pound of a pound of lead or a pound of flour. All right. So check that out. That's about what we want it to look like. Now we need to let this cook for about 5 minutes. So we're going to take a break for a minute. I'm going to take my knife and just quickly run through this. I want to break it up into smaller bits. I'll show you when we go ahead and add our milk to this. We'll get ready to make our sauce, and there's also going to be a glaze we're going to make that's going to go on top of my great-grandmother's applesauce squares. So our roux has had a chance to cook. It's starting to smell just a little bit nutty, which is what you want. The butter with the onions and the celery just smells awesome. Awesome, awesome. So now we're going to go ahead and add our milk to this. So it's really important when you do this that you have at least one of these ingredients cold. You have to have either cold roux or cold milk. If you have them both warm, what happens is it thickens instantly. If it thickens instantly, then you're going to end up with roux balls like we talked about before. Now I actually pulled just a little bit of the roux out of here in case I didn't make it thick enough. Then I can add a little bit more of the roux in it. But we can turn our heat back up on this now. And we want to kind of baby this. I've stirred it enough that it's all dissolved. I can go ahead and I'm going to put a little pinch of nutmeg in. And I'm going to put a pinch of salt in because we don't have any salt in there yet. 2 pinches of salt. And you can see this is already starting to thicken up. All right, so we'll give that a moment. I'm going to grab a little more butter, and we're going to make the sauce that's going to go on top. So I'm going to throw a little bit of butter in there. Now, this isn't something you have to do, but I have a little bit of leftover celery and onion from when I made our croquettes. So I'm going to add a little bit of this diced celery and onion to our sauce. Now I'm going to take that out of the sauce. When we're done, we'll strain it out. But it's going to add wonderful celery and onion flavor right to this. All right. So your roux has come to its complete total thickness once it starts to simmer. So we're not quite there yet. We can take this and just give this a little toss. So what we're going to do here is we're making another roux. That's looking good. I think we're going to need a little bit more of this roux though. So I have some of the roux here. It's cooled down, so I can go ahead and add that now without worrying about making huge roux balls. Now that's getting thick. Look at that. Look how thick that's getting. Not thick enough yet though. It's better to have it a little bit too thick than a little bit too thin, because you can always thin it out. But now I've used all my roux, so I can't make it any thicker. All right, over here we've had our onions and celery have sweat enough. I'm going to go ahead and add my flour. So we're actually making two of the mother sauces here. So mother sauces from classic French cuisine are sauces that you would make and you can make a bunch of other sauces from. So this one here is going to end up being velouté. So we're going to make a roux and we're going to thicken it with chicken stock. This one is a bechamel. All right, I need to turn this down because we're browning on the bottom, which isn't the end of the world, but we don't want to brown too much. But you can see how quickly that happens now that, look how thick this is now. That's about perfect though. So now I'm going to go ahead and add our chicken right to that. It's a pretty good amount of chicken. Now I'm going to turn this off. And I'll stir this with a spoon now because I don't want to get it all inside my whisk here. We'll move this off to the side. All right. So now that this is off, I want to let this cool a little bit. It's going to make our life a lot easier when we go to form them if they're cool. It's going to make it a lot easier on our hands. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make the glaze for our applesauce squares. Very, very simple. I've got some butter that's just room temperature, a little bit less than a little bit more than room temperature, so soft. I'm going to add just a drop of vanilla, some milk, and confectioner's sugar. That's it. That's our glaze. So I'm going to take a minute, whisk this together. We'll let our roux keep cooking here. We'll get ready to form our croquettes into shapes, and we'll see how our stuff in the oven's doing. All right, so while we were away, I drained our potatoes. Our potatoes are nice and tender now. I actually took our croquettes and threw them in the refrigerator. You can do it a couple different ways. You can throw them in there right in the pot, or you can form them and throw them in. For the sake of time, because I want to form them, but they were too hot for my hands, I threw them in the refrigerator now. I need to check our apple squares, which should be just about done. Yeah, and they look perfect. Now look at that. If I touch the middle, there's no jiggling. I can't make it jiggle at all. That's a good sign that they're done. You can always test it with a toothpick or something. I'm going to let that sit back there for about 5 or 8 minutes before I pour the glaze on. I want it to still be warm so it finishes melting some of that butter, but I don't want it too hot because it'll melt and it'll seep right into it. I want you to be able to see the glaze when we go to eat it. All right, so I want to go ahead and make our sauce. So let me move this to the front burner, or the closest to me. So our roux has had a chance to cook. Now I'm going to add chicken stock to this. I'm fortunate to have some nice fresh chicken stock here. And same thing, I want to whisk this around until all that roux dissolves. Now I can go ahead and turn my heat up. And so a supreme sauce, which is one of my aunt's favorite dishes, is chicken supreme. So I should give her a shout out to Aunt Pam because she helped hook me up with being here, and she's actually given me some of the recipes we've done on the show. But I'm Pam, so this is how you make the supreme sauce that I make for you. But all it is a chicken veloute, one of those mother sauces, with the addition of a little bit of heavy cream. It's actually a really simple sauce once you know how to make a roux. You know, there's not a lot of restaurants that serve really heavy French cuisine anymore that are based on all these mother sauces, but it's still super important to learn for a young chef or someone who wants to cook more and more to have these mother sauces in their arsenal, because you can do so much to them. Once you understand how they work, you can apply it to so many different things. All right, while I'm letting this come up to a simmer, I'm going to take my potatoes, dump them in this bowl, just to get them out of the way, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to melt butter, sour cream, and heavy cream, because why not? You should always have 3 kinds of fat in your potatoes. So I'm going to throw in exactly that much sour cream, and that looks like about enough butter. And give this a quick stir. And we'll add this much heavy cream. All right, so we'll go ahead and turn that on. The reason I'm doing that is our potatoes are nice and hot now. They're hot enough to melt our butter and to warm up our sour cream, but what's going to happen is the temperature of our potatoes is going to drop a lot. It's always good to add warm stuff, because that way you can hold it a lot longer. Potatoes are really thick. They'll hold their temperature well, even if you just put them in a nice insulated pan and stick them off to the side, stick them on top of the stove. I want to hit this with a little bit of salt. You can throw some white pepper in there if you want. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna use black pepper because I don't care about the little specks. That's looking perfect. So we've come to a simmer, and I'll show you how thick this is. So it's a little thicker than we want it, which is okay because we're not done adding our liquid yet. The last thing we're going to add is our heavy cream. At this point, you want to shut off your heat, because you actually want to be really careful when you add fat. When you add something like heavy cream or cheese to a sauce, if you heat it too high, it'll actually separate. Just to get it to the consistency you want. And that looks perfect. But I don't know if it tastes perfect, so let's taste it. Yeah, that's really good. Fantastic. So I'm going to shut this all the way off. We'll let that sit here. Take a peek over here. All right, so our butter and sour cream mixture is almost melted. We're going to let it go for another minute or 2. In the meantime, I'm going to season this with our salt and pepper that I'm going to put in my potatoes anyways, because it's just going to save me a step later on. I can always adjust my seasonings after I taste. Now I'm going to actually mash these with this. I'm not worried about mixing back and forth. We're all sitting down and have a big family meal together, and I actually like this whisk because it's got a little bit thicker. It's got a little more to it, so it's going to let me mash my potatoes right in like this. All right, that's looking great. I'm going to shut that off. We'll pour all that right in there, all that goodness. It's a shame to have mashed potatoes without fat in them. I've gone some places when people try to make them healthy. Mashed potatoes aren't supposed to be healthy. Have a baked potato with nothing on it if you want healthy. If you're going to have mashed potatoes, mash them up. Fatten them up. All right, so I'm using red potatoes here. Red potatoes generally have a nice thin skin, so it's something that you can actually leave right on the potato. You can do that with chef potatoes too. If you're using like a baker potato, which isn't the best, but if that's the only thing you have for mashed potatoes, you usually want to peel those because the skins are a little tough. All right. We are good here, so I'm gonna sample these. Let's save a little sample for later. Yep, even on the shirt, they're very good. All right, excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of this out of my whisk here. This is one of the hazards of doing it with a whisk, is that some of it gets stuck in there. Not that big of a deal. If you want them super, super smooth, keep them beating on it. Put the beaters on your mixer, your handheld mixer, and mix it around like that if you want. All right, so things are starting to come together here. Our apple squares are done. Mashed potatoes are done. Our sauce is done. I'm going to move a couple of these things out of the way. And let's take a peek at our squash and see how that is. So that I can take a spoon and pop it in here and it should go right through. Yeah, that's nice and tender. Excellent. So what we're going to do is take our spaghetti squash and we're going to find out why our spaghetti squash got its name. As we take this and we start to scrape it, check that out. Looks just like spaghetti. We're going to go ahead and put this right in a bowl. So I'm going to take a couple minutes, finish scraping out our spaghetti squash. We already seasoned this with a little bit of oil, a little bit of salt and pepper, but we're going to finish adjusting the seasonings with a little more butter and some salt and pepper. And we're going to bread our croquettes, and then it'll be ready time to eat. All right, welcome back. So I've cleaned up. I took our croquettes out of the refrigerator. I formed one into a ball. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bread it and fry it. So it's going to go in seasoned flour. That's just flour with salt and pepper, seasoned pretty liberally. Then we're going to go into our egg wash, which is just, in this case, is just egg with a little bit of water just to thin it out. But the egg is going to make the flour stick to the breadcrumbs. Then we're going to dredge this completely in the breadcrumbs. So I have a little pot here with oil that's about 350 degrees. I'm going to lift this up so I don't splash myself. I'm going to put it on the spoon and drop it in like this. And just let it go. So I'm going to do a few more of these. I'm going to plate up all our food. We'll get Arthur up here and we'll see what he thinks of what we made tonight. Hey Arthur.
Welcome back, Matt.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here at Hudson Appliance. So we did a couple fun things today. I was telling the audience that I was really frustrated when we couldn't find these things at the supermarket. And these are chicken croquettes.
Ooh, they look good.
So I decided to make some. I've got a little sauce here that's a supreme sauce. I decided to leave the chunks in there because I had a taste and it was actually fantastic. So this is just like a chicken gravy with a little cream in it. Now, what's next to it, it kind of looks like it might be spaghetti, but that's actually spaghetti squash, and right underneath some mashed potatoes. And over here, these are my great-grandmother's applesauce squares. Ready to give it a whirl?
Sure.
All right, why don't we try these croquettes here first. That's just what you're looking for, that crunchy outside, nice soft middle.
That is very good.
Very good.
Very, very good.
Want to try one of these apple squares? We'll be civilized and use a fork, because I don't think we will in a couple minutes when the camera's off.
Now that's
Wicked good.